Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at Morphe's with a real doozy of a forgotten weapon. In fact, we don't know what the name of this is or specifically who came up with the concept. Fundamentally, what we have here is a gravity-fed, hand-crank, cartridge-firing, repeating gun. You could think of this in the same category as Gatling guns, as perhaps Nordenfelt guns. This is an early Crankfire machine gun. Not really a machine gun, but single-barreled. It is not water-cooled, despite the brass jacket here. It's fed by a gravity box magazine. Don't know the exact capacity. In fact, these magazines are modern reproduction because the original magazines for the gun are long gone, lost. This is chambered for the '58 Morse cartridge. Now, Morse was an early pioneer in self-contained cartridges. He developed a centerfire self-contained cartridge in the mid to late 1850s, and he actually got a contract with the US government to make Morse carbines using his new cartridge technology. They set up the production line at Harper's Ferry, and almost none of them actually got produced before the Civil War began. Morse ended up siding with the South in the Civil War. There was some Confederate use of Morse carbine, some manufacture, but Morse doesn't appear to really have been directly involved in this. His cartridge technology became known, and at some point, this was built in England using his design of cartridge. So that probably dates this to something like late 1850s, early 1860s. This very well could have been constructed while the US Civil War was ongoing. I have actually seen some claim that this was a Confederate used weapon, but I don't see a whole lot of direct evidence for that. I think that is probably speculative based on the fact that Morse himself did end up working for the Confederacy, and the British also assisted the Confederacy. But I haven't found any evidence or documentation or anything that this was in the US at the time. This gun was actually inspected by Herb Wooden, who is a now deceased, alas, former curator of the British Royal Armouries collection. And they had x-rays of the barrel. He concluded that this was a one-off Enfield manufactured barrel. We do actually have British proofs on some other parts of the gun. And it's really an interesting piece. Worth pointing out, while it is chambered for '58 Morse, it can actually also use .577 Snider ammunition. There's a cartridge style that was made for the Snider that has a metallic base and a paper body to the cartridge, and those rounds will fire in it. Apparently, actually, the previous owner of this fired about 100 rounds of Morse ammunition and 100 rounds of Snider ammunition through it. So the thing actually even works, which is super cool. I do want to point out, before we go farther, the gun, as far as I know, is completely original. There's a crack in this side of the stock that you'll see that was stabilized, but other than that, it hasn't had any parts replaced or restored, with the exception of the magazines that were made. Whoop, stay balanced, you. The magazines were made for it. We're just going to tip that down this way. And the tripod, I believe, is a surveying tripod, and the previous owner had the tripod head made to hold the gun itself. And I put it up on this tripod because it just looks so cool mounted on a tripod, like this sort of thing should be. But the gun itself is totally original. Check that out. This is extremely cool. Let's take a closer look up close. Closer look up close. Yes, let's do that. All right, so the magazine here is this gigantic stick coming up out of the side. And this is, like I said, not original. This is modern manufactured to complement the gun itself. But this is functionally a duplicate of one of the main Gatling gun feeding systems. You just have a weighted follower here. You would fill this up with cartridges. There's a little end cap that goes on it. and when you're ready to use it, it just snaps into the feed tray or the feed box here on the gun. For what it's worth, there also is sort of a funnel attachment here that you can put in, there we go, to allow you to just sort of drop cartridges in a more ad hoc fashion to feed the thing. So this is hand crank operated. As I turn the crank, the bolt here is going to cycle back and forth. The hammer here is going to also cycle in and out. So that feeds the cartridge up, bolt closes, locks, fires. There we go, up a little closer. And from the other side, this gun has a really cool mixture of forged and machined steel parts in here, as well as lots of cool brass elements as well. The rear sight is pretty definitely British, and we do actually have a little British proof mark on it there. A little hard to see, but it is in there. You can lift the sight up. You can also adjust it for relatively short ranges just by moving the slider back and forth. Then the front sight is a brass post on the end of the barrel jacket. This is not a water jacket, by the way. There's just air inside here. There's a gap of air and then the barrel. And I expect the reason for it is as the barrel heats up, normally you would have issues of heat mirage coming off the top of the barrel. And a barrel jacket like this is going to help control that. It doesn't get rid of it, but you can see this as a similar sort of feature on guns like the German Gewehr 88. Over on this side, we kind of have a mystery part here. There's this bar that pivots out of the stock that far, and I have absolutely no idea what it does. It's only connected to the wood. It doesn't protrude inside the wood. It has no mechanical function on the gun at all. You got me. If you have any idea what that thing does, let me know down in the comments. Then there's a second piece here that's actually in the butt plate and slides out that far before it hits a stop. Similarly, no clue what that thing is supposed to do. I will tell you though, this thing is seriously neat. All right, let's go ahead and get it up on the table and take it apart. This is actually going to be surprisingly easy to disassemble, and I think you'll really like the inside. So we're gonna start by removing the hand crank, just loosen the screw, and I can pull that off. Then we have a couple of brass bands out here. These are only held on by tension, and I can slide all three of them off. Then the wooden component is split on the bottom, and I have 3 screws here, plus I have 4 screws in the butt plate. I'm going to start with those. All right, there are the 4 screws there, and now I can pull off the butt plate, including this bar that sits in it. I honestly have no idea what the purpose of that bar is, but that's the butt plate. You've got 2 screws in the left and 2 screws in the right side of the wood. Now I can remove the 3 main screws on the side. These just go clear through the inner workings and tighten down into nuts on the wood on the other side. And now I can very carefully lift this whole piece of wood off the side of the gun. So there's the inside. That's a bit fragile and a lot of complicated cutouts in there, but there isn't actually anything mechanical in the wood element. Now I've got 1 screw here on the other side, which I already loosened. Pull that out. And we can lift off the wooden component on this side, and we have pretty much the same thing here, with the exception of this magazine feed sort of feed tower there on it. All right, this thing is actually a little bit less complicated than it looks at first glance. Fundamentally, we have two steel side plates here that are bolted together, and in the middle, we have a bolt right here. We have a cartridge lifter that's going to pull rounds from the magazine, feed in here, lift them up, line them up with the chamber. The bolt will then feed them in. And then we have a hand cranked, essentially a cam track. It's not really a toggle, but it is an eccentric cam right here that is going to pull the bolt back and forth. This is our hammer. So if I put the hand crank back on, I can cycle this through. All right, so we'll start it right here. This is the fired position. The bolt is all the way closed. It has just fired. That's the hammer right there, the firing pin's inside the bolt. All right, and if I then start to crank the handle around, you can see we're going to turn these two gears. So the handle's here, but the actual pivot point where the cam is mounted is back here. That's why you have the second gear to transfer the movement back to there. And we're going to start to pull the bolt backwards. So you can see the bolt up here moving back. It is in the process also recocking the hammer. So the hammer is connected to this cylinder here. We have a V-spring right there. That's what powers the hammer. And then we have a sear right there. So this is the sear notch we'll get to in just a moment. The bolt keeps going back. It's rotating, it's pushing the hammer back, which is rotating this cylinder. And right there, you hear the click. This toe has just dropped in behind the sear notch, so that's going to hold the hammer in the cocked position as we continue. So now, as I continue cranking the handle, the bolt is going to start going forward, but the hammer is being held back here. It's under spring pressure from this V-spring, but it's being held in place by a sear right there. Now, when the bolt goes all the way forward, it will trip a little latch on the inside of the receiver here, down in there, which pushes this backwards, releases it, and drops the hammer. But in the meantime, you can see the cam link down in there, pushing the bolt forward. It's going to push a cartridge in, and right there, drop the hammer and fires it. So let's do this again. Now this time, let's look at the feed system. This is where cartridges feed in from that big gravity-fed magazine, and there's a lifter down here at the bottom. There's the bottom of the brass lifter. It's right there. As the bolt starts to go backward, there we go, that lifter is going to come up. There it is, it's lifting the round up, lifts it all the way up in line with the chamber here. Yep. And then the bolt is going to start going forward. So it's got the cartridge, it's pushing it in. Once it's far enough in that it's being held by the chamber, that lifter will drop back down, ready to pick up the next cartridge. And there we go. Now, one last thing to show you in here. Let's look up close at the chamber. So that's the bolt, that's the chamber right there. As we crank it, the bolt is going to open. This is the extractor, and it doesn't get going for a moment. So the bolt opens about a 1/4 inch before the extractor actually starts to pull the case out of the chamber. And it's going to pull it all the way back there. And then I believe it would be essentially ejected out the top of the action by the next round coming up on that lifter. So there you go. That's the mechanical operation of the system. It's really not that complicated. It looks super cool and steampunk, but really what you have going on is just a cam that translates rotational motion of the crank handle into forward and backward motion of the bolt, with 2 extra mechanical elements attached onto it, one of them being the hammer, spring-powered. It gets cocked and then released, and the other being the cartridge lifter, which just goes up and then back down at set intervals during the cycle. To my mind, these sorts of early hand-cranked proto-machine guns, the manually operated machine guns, to use that phrase, these are like one of the coolest categories of firearms development out there. They're also incredibly steampunk and interesting, and they all have very different character and just really neat examples of mechanical innovation going on, typically in the mid to late 1800s. So this is a literal one-of-a-kind, unique, not previously known, and still largely unidentified example. The construction is fantastic on it. The provenance specifically on this gun, we can trace back to the 1950s, a couple owners back, when it came out of a small museum in Canada that was deaccessioning all of its collections. Unfortunately, there's no information on where that museum got it. So the trail goes dead in the 1950s, which leaves probably about 100 years where we don't know exactly where this was or what it was doing. Anyway, fantastically cool piece here. Big thanks to Morphes for giving me the opportunity to take a look at it, to pull the stocks off and show you guys exactly how it works inside. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.